ask Larry Nelson from my office to sit in for the witness and read his answers to the questions. I will ask the questions. I ask Scott Hughes on direct. Mr. Matthews will ask him the questions he has to run across.
Very good. Is that correct, Mr. Matthews?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Come on forward, Mr. Nelson.
Judge, going right from the transcript, that Chief Scott Hughes, a witness herein, having been first duly sworn, was examined and deposed as follows. Tell us your name.
Scott Hughes,
How are you employed?
currently Chief of Police in Hamilton Township, Warren County.
How long have you been so employed?
I've been the Chief of Police since March.
What was your police experience prior to your current duty as Chief of Police up there?
Prior to Chief in Hamilton Township, I was Assistant Chief in Riverside, Montgomery County for about 8 months. Spent the bulk of my career, about 15 plus years, in Springfield Township. Prior to Springfield Township, I spent a couple of years in Green Hills.
In addition to your duties as a police officer up through the rank of police chief, over those years and currently, do you also teach and instruct other officers?
Yes, sir, I do.
And what qualifies you to teach and instruct other officers?
Sure. So I've been instructing basic police academy since about 2000. One of the topics that I have taught in the police academy since I started 15, 16 years ago has been stops and approaches, which is also known as car stops. Additionally, I hold the title of Police Academy School Commander and recently was asked to sit on the OPATA Peace Officer Curriculum Board to revamp the curriculum for traffic stops.
Pursuant to that career, especially in teaching, have you ever instructed the defendant, in this case, Ray Tensing?
Yes, I have.
Do you see him in court here today?
I do.
Point him out, please.
Seated across the table wearing the gray shirt.
Did you ever teach him any of these courses you are referring to?
I taught Ray Tensing in a course that I teach for a company called Calibre Press. That class is entitled Tactics in Traffic, and I taught Ray in December of 2014.
Could you describe basically what you teach in that course or summarize the main points that you teach in that course?
Sure. So it's a class that we teach across the country that primarily deals with traffic stops and the dangers surrounding traffic stops, some best practices with regard to making traffic stops, everything from how to position the police cruiser to how to do high-risk felony stops.
And are there certain cautions you impart to the police officers to make sure that they can do this in a safe manner without injuring themselves or other people?
There are, yes.
And what are some of those?
Well, one of the big keeps you out of traffic. Number one, and number two, it gives you some tactical advantage. As with a lot of the things, if you will, that we teach in law enforcement training, there's always variables. There's certain terrains, certain conditions where you can't go up on the right-hand side of the vehicle, so you may have to make a driver's side approach. So that's one.
What about where to position themselves if it's a regular traffic stop? It appears to be there's only one person in the vehicle. Where do you position when you're inquiring with the driver of that vehicle?
So again, we let the officer decide. Again, I encourage passenger side approaches. A lot of officers do the traditional driver's side approach. When they do the driver's side approach, we just encourage them to stay behind what we refer to as the B pillar.
Is that B as in Bravo?
I'm sorry, yes, B as in boy.
And that's the post between the front driver's side window and the rear driver's side window.
That's correct.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm talking fast. We encourage officers that if you are going to make a driver's side approach, stand behind the B pillar, stay away from squaring with the driver's side window, things like that.
What if you make a decision if for whatever reason you want to get the driver out of the vehicle? What are some of the things you instruct them? What's the best practice to go about doing that, especially if either the car is still on or the key is still in the ignition?
Yes. So one of the things we stress in the class is the fact that when you get people out of the vehicle, it's always a very dynamic situation, especially from the driver's side. When they get out of the car, if you don't create enough distance between you and the violator as they exit the car, they could shove you out in the traffic. You could be fighting with them in the driver's door jamb, if you will. You know, if they open the door and you're standing there, that could become, you have the potential of fighting there, being pushed into traffic, like I said. So one method that we teach, one way that we instruct officers to handle this, is to have the motorist turn the car off and hand the officer the keys. Some officers will have them turn the car off and put the keys up on the dashboard.
And that's to keep the person from driving off?
Absolutely.
Okay?
Absolutely. We want to make sure that the car is turned off so they can't take off on you.
Okay?
Once they turn the car off and you either take possession of the keys or the keys are up on the dashboard, they can't get to them, then we would instruct officers in the right conditions. In other words, if you've not stopped an SUV or truck that sits up real high, if you're stopping just a regular, quote-unquote, regular vehicle, passenger-sized vehicle, one option you can do is you can have the driver, while still in the driver's seat, you can have them put his hands either on top of his head or put his hands behind his back and basically rotate towards you.
So he's facing the passenger side window?
That's correct. He would be facing the passenger side. And again, with his hands on the top of his head or his hands behind his back, you would simply have him extend his hands out to you if they're behind his back, or, you know, lean back if he's got his hands on the back of his head, and then apply the handcuffs. That keeps from you having to reach inside the car, and it keeps an officer. Let me just give you an example. If you have a female police officer who is 5 foot and they're stopping a defendant who is 6'4", there's a little bit of awkwardness, right? The defendant is real tall, you're real small. If he got out of the car, now you're overpowered. By keeping them inside the car and handcuffing him that way, it takes a lot of that height and weight out of the differential. So any officers with regards to physical strength should be able to do this with no issues.
And you just used the phrase reaching inside the car. Is there anything you teach about reaching inside a vehicle that you have stopped?
Yes. It's always discouraged to reach inside of the vehicle, especially if the car is running and there's a driver in the driver's seat, yes.
Is that something you emphasize in the training?
We do talk about that in training, yes.
And I know you have a PowerPoint, but this is a couple of slides from the PowerPoint. This is a PowerPoint that you use in this course that you indicated that you taught to Ray Tensing in December of 2014. Is that correct?
Correct.
If I could show you what's been marked as States Exhibits 21A and 21B, ask if you can identify those. Go ahead.
Yes. So 21A is a screenshot of a commercial that I use from Farmers Insurance. It's a cheesy commercial, but it reflects it's a teenager driving a car, and he crashes it into a front yard. It shows the actor in the movie reaching inside the car, taking the keys out. And what I do is, on the PowerPoint slide, it stops when the guy reaches inside the car. I display this, and on the screen it says, never, 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 never reach into a vehicle. Again, I just kind of use that to illustrate when I speak. It kind of gives you a visual of what I'm saying.
Okay, and the jurors are not here right now, but we will at this point in your testimony display this. Move this into evidence. Any objection? No objection. We will display that for the jury at this point. State's Exhibit 21B, if you can identify that.
21B, unfortunately, this is a PowerPoint slide that I use immediately following this one that depicts Officer Kevin Crayon from the city of Cincinnati. Unfortunately, back in 2000, he stopped a vehicle or had an encounter with a young man at a gas station parking lot on Coleraine Avenue and reached inside the vehicle. He got entangled inside the car. The car took off, and it ended up killing Officer Kevin Crayon. The young man driving the car also passed away. I popped this up as a reminder, unfortunately, of the realities that we face in this profession every day.
I would at this point move into evidence State's Exhibit number 21B. I'll display this for the jury. So you're basically emphasizing to the students that you don't reach inside a car, because if you do, this might be what happens to you you might end up like Officer Kevin Crayon and lose your life as a result.
Correct.
No further questions of this witness.
Chief Hughes, did you go straight from high school to the police academy?
I worked. I wasn't old enough to go into the academy, but yes, there was a couple-year break.
Okay, and then your first job out of the academy was with Green Hills, correct?
That's correct.
Did you know Ray Tenzing at the Green Hills Police Department?
I did not.
Okay, and then you're a little older than he is, correct?
Correct.
And then you went to Springfield Township, correct?
Correct.
And you spent, what, 15 years?
About 15 years, yes.
And during the course of your employment with Springfield Township, did you ever have any contact with Ray Tenzing?
I did.
And that was when he was with the Green Hills Police Department?
Yes, sir.
During your police career, you've had firearms training, correct?
I have.
Does that firearms training ever teach you to shoot to kill anybody or teach you to wound anybody?
No. Shoot to stop the threat.
Thank you, sir. You indicated you teach at a particular police academy now, correct?
I've taught at 2 academies here locally. I taught at Butler Tech, and I also taught at Great Oaks.
And are you teaching now?
I'm teaching at Butler Tech now. Yes, sir.
During your 17 years or 15 years on the street or whatever, it was, well, I guess it's 17 by the time you had Green Hills on, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you ever reach into a car?
I have.
Now, you would agree with me, would you not, that vehicle stops are one of the more potentially dangerous aspects of the law enforcement profession?
Absolutely.
That comes right out of the OPATA manual, is that correct?
That's correct.
Would you agree with me that the OPATA manual also says never reach into a car with your dominant hand?
If you showed me the curriculum, I don't want to say yes or no, and here's why. The curriculum was just rewritten, so depending upon what version you're looking at, because I'm going to assume that Ray's version was the older version, that may well be in there, yes, sir. I would have to see it. I'm sorry.
Again, I'm referring to, and I don't have it back here in this deposition room, well, I might. I have it on a disc specifically.
Sure.
I don't have that with me actually, but how about no, I don't have that particular site with me, but if I told you that in the vehicle stops and approaches section, it indicated that an officer should never reach into a car with his dominant hand. Would you agree with that?
Maybe in the old manual. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to be difficult because the only reason I say that is in the new manual, I know that was a topic of discussion. So I apologize. I'm not trying to not answer your question.
What is the dominant hand? If it's referring to a dominant hand, can you tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury what that is?
Sure. The dominant hand would reflect primarily what hand the officer would draw his sidearm with. So if he's right-handed and he carries his weapon on his right-hand side, then the right hand would be dominant. If he's left-handed and carries his weapon on the left-hand side, he would be left-hand dominant.
Thank you, sir. And actually, I believe that is in section B. It's on page 31 of 72 pages in the vehicle stops and approaches. 16I says the officer should never reach into a vehicle or grab anything near the suspect with the dominant hand. Have you ever seen that before?
That sounds like the old manual that he would have received when he went through the academy. That sounds correct.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
Sorry about the confusion.
That's okay. I'm sorry.
You talk about handcuffing a suspect or one way to control a suspect when you're going to get them out of the car, and you talk about what I'll refer to as a handcuffing in the car technique.
Yes, sir.
That would require, in order to accomplish that you open the car door where the suspect is seated, correct?
Correct.
You indicated that you emphasize in your training that officers ought to make passenger side approaches, correct?
Absolutely.
That is not written in stone or any absolute requirement.
No, it's not.
Would you agree with me that there are no absolutes in law enforcement?
Correct.
Every situation is different.
Yes.
And you've just shown the jury, or the jury will be shown slides from your traffic course. The one that says never, never, never reach into a car. In the ideal world, that's what would happen, correct?
That's correct.
In the real world, I would assume that you would agree with me that that doesn't happen, especially all the time, 100% of the time.
Yes.
Would you agree with me that officers frequently and often reach into cars?
Frequently is a tough word. I would say it does happen.
And it happens around the United States. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Yes, it does.
Would you agree that there are often stories in the news about officers who have done that and who have been dragged as a result of it?
Absolutely.
And would you agree with me that there are oftentimes officers would do that and nothing ever happens? They pull it off safely.
Correct.
And would you agree with me that there are times when officers are forced to reach into cars?
Yes.
Now, you mentioned Kevin Crayon from the Cincinnati Police Department. Can you elaborate a little bit on what happened with Kevin Crayon, if you know?
I can tell you what I think I know. How's that? In that, Kevin got dispatched to a gas station on Coleraine Avenue for a juvenile driving recklessly. Kevin went to turn the car off, at which point the kid started to put the car in drive. Something transpired, and Kevin reached into the car. As I understand it, his hand got caught up in the steering wheel. The kid accelerated rapidly down Coleraine Avenue with Kevin, in essence, hanging on. Kevin pulled a service revolver out or weapon out and fired a round. Kevin fell off the vehicle, and I believe the kid drove home to Winton Terrace or Bahama Terrace or Hawaiian Terrace, where he passed away.
And Kevin Crayon also passed away as a result of that incident, correct?
Correct.
And that is your prime example of never, never, never reach into a car.
Right.
But you agree that it happens.
Correct.
Would you agree that oftentimes officers react instinctively in situations?
Yes.
I think we're finished.
Things on redirect. You indicated sometimes you're forced to reach into a car,
Yes.
for example.
I think the most common one would be when a drunk driver passed out behind the wheel. Guys will reach into the car and they'll take the keys out of the ignition so the guy doesn't start driving away. You know, if you walk up to a car and a guy pulls out a knife and starts stabbing the kid next to him, you're going to reach in and try to grab the knife from him. There are those types of situations, yes.
And you indicated that you're not taught to shoot to kill. You use the terminology "stop the threat." Is that correct?
Right.
But sometimes to stop the threat, you will shoot to kill.
Right, yes.
Nothing else from us. I concluded the deposition.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson, for your assistance. State, call your next witness.
This is our next witness, Dr. Karen Logan. And I think that we might have some family members who will not be in the court for this testimony. If you give us just a second, Judge.
Sure. Take your time.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Ladies and gentlemen in the gallery, Dr. Luman is the coroner. She will be testifying about the autopsy. This will include graphic photographs, so if it's something that you care not to see, please leave the room now. Good morning, Doctor. Please raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. I do. Very good. Please take a seat. Put the microphone down to you.
Dr. Loman, would you tell the jurors your name and spell your name for the court reporter?
My name's Dr. Karen Loman, Looman.
And would you tell us what you do for a living?
I'm the Chief Deputy Coroner and Forensic Pathologist, and I work at the Hamilton County Coroner's Office.
And what do your duties entail in that capacity?
My main job is to determine the cause and manner of death in individuals that end up in our office.
How do you do that?
One of the main things is I perform an autopsy on an individual where I'm looking at both the external aspect of a body as well as the internal aspect of a body. I also look at medical records, police reports. I do a toxicology, which means I take blood from an individual and evaluate if there's medications or drugs in the system. I take all of those things and put them together and come up with a cause of death and a manner of death.
At this time, I would ask you about your educational and employment history that enables you to be the Chief Deputy Coroner, unless Mr. Matthews has any dispute about your qualifications.
Yes. Very good.
All right, you indicated that one of the primary duties you have as the chief deputy coroner is that you perform autopsies, is that correct?
Yes.
Is an autopsy an actual medical procedure?
Yes, it is.
And could you tell us just generally, what are the steps you take? How do you go through an autopsy?
Well, an autopsy, again, is I look at the outside of a body. Many times people have scars that can tell me what kind of medical procedures a person has had. For example, if they have a scar down the center of their chest, it tells me that maybe they had a surgery dealing with their heart. And I also look at injuries that an individual has on the body. I actually have a cartoon diagram that I draw all these findings on. The next aspect is doing an internal examination. So I open the chest and the abdomen and I look at the organs. The organs can also tell you if there's disease, and so I look at each one and evaluate if there's disease there or not. That also involves opening the head and looking in the head at the brain to see if there's any disease there. And based on what I find, I then write a report. And then the report is finalized when all the other aspects come into place, like the medical records, police records, the toxicology report comes back, and I put them all together, and I come up with a cause of death.
Do you normally, as part of your autopsy, in addition to writing a report, either take or direct the taking of photographs of the autopsy to document your findings?
Yes, I do.
And would it be fair to say that the purpose in doing an autopsy is determine how and why a person died at that particular time?
Yes.
How many autopsies do you think you've performed in your career?
2,500.
And in each one of those 2,500 autopsies, at the end, you wrote a report and you made findings as to how and why that person died?
Yes, I did.
Do you take x-rays of the person prior to the autopsy?
In certain circumstances, we do take x-rays, yes.
And is a secondary purpose of the autopsy to collect any evidence that's inside the body that you think might be relevant to that person's death?
Yes, that's true.
What's a coroner's case? That is a case where an autopsy is required by law.
There are 5 general categories that somebody who passes away may come to our office. If there's any accident, if there's a suicide, if there's a homicide, if there is an undetermined, in other words, we just have no idea why somebody passed away. We do have some natural deaths. People who pass away and don't have a physician, they need somebody to sign a death certificate, and I end up being their physician for a day when I do their autopsy. So those are the type of the cases that come through our office.
All right. If I could, let me direct your attention to a Sunday afternoon or early evening. That'd be July the 19th, 2015. At some point were you contacted and advised that a UC police officer had fatally shot a citizen named Samuel Dubose?
Yes.
And sometimes, as the coroner, do you go to the scene?
Sometimes I do, yes.
And did you, in this case, go to the scene at Rice Street and Valencia?
Yes.
Tell us what you saw when you went to the scene.
There was a small car that had crashed into a brick wall. It was on the left side of a road. There was a person perpendicular to the car laying on the road, and he'd been covered with a sheet.
And had he been pronounced dead by the Cincinnati Fire Department?
Yes, he was pronounced dead prior to me getting there.
Did you look under the sheet and look at the body of Samuel Dubose?
Yes.
Did any injuries that you saw there at the scene stand out to you and strike you as something that you would need to address at the autopsy?
Yes.
Were those injuries to Samuel Dubose's head?
Yes.
Now, at that point, did you determine this was definitely a coroner's case and an autopsy was required?
Yes.
Did you direct that the body be transported to the Hamilton County morgue?
Yes.
And where is that?
That's on Eden Avenue. It's very near UC Hospital.
And that next morning, did you perform an autopsy on Samuel Dubose's
Yes.
body?
Yes, I did.
And just for purposes of identification, would he be referred as a male black, 43 years of age, about 6 feet tall, and about 180 pounds?
Yes.
Tell me how the autopsy of Samuel DuBose started off.
Samuel DuBose came into our office in a white body bag. We opened the body bag and you take photographs of Sam, how he was dressed, how he appeared when we put him in the body bag. We then take the clothes off and evaluate the clothes for defects, blood, anything that could be of evidentiary value. We document that. We then document Sam's body with photographs, as well as me drawing on a cartoon piece of paper. It's a cartoon of a body. I document it that way. I look for the injuries and I describe the injuries on my diagrams, and then we proceed to go and do an internal examination.
Did you do an autopsy, an X-ray in this case?
Yes, we did do an X-ray in his case.
Did it reflect to you the presence of any objects inside of Samuel DuBose's body?
There was a metallic object in Sam's head.
Okay. And you said the clothing comes with the person when they come to the autopsy, is that correct?
Yes,
And that you look at that clothing for defects?
yes.
And did you notice a hat in this case that appeared to have a defect that looked like a bullet hole in it?
The hat did not come with the body.
Okay, that was submitted later?
Yes.
All right, when it was submitted by Cincinnati Police, did you have an occasion to look at it with Kevin Laddick, the firearms examiner?
Yes.
Okay. Let's talk about the external examination of Samuel DuBose's body. What injuries did you note on the outside of Samuel DuBose's body?
Samuel had a gunshot wound to the left side of his head. It was above his ear. He had a second gunshot wound on the right side of his head behind his ear. He also had a cut through his eyebrow. I call it a laceration. And he had scrapes to his knees.
With regard to the gunshot wound, now you've talked about two gunshot wounds, a gunshot wound on the left side of his head and a gunshot wound on the right side. As you examined the body externally, were those two separate and distinct gunshot wounds, or were they part of a single gunshot wound?
They're considered part of one gunshot wound. It's an entrance and an exit. So it's part of one path of one bullet.
And as you examine a body externally, are you oftentimes able to tell which is the entrance wound and which is the exit wound?
Yes.
And could you tell us how you do that? Let's start with the left side of Samuel DuBose's head. And if you could on yourself, show the jurors and describe where that bullet entered his head.
So the bullet entered above his ear, right here. And usually a bullet, when it touches the skin, it actually deforms the skin a little bit. It's pushing its way into the skin. It actually tears, a little tear, as it's creating a hole. And so when I look at a wound on a body, I look for that tear. I call it an abrasion collar. That will tell me that's the entrance. Now, once the bullet goes through a body, the bullet usually goes in a straight line, but it does get a little off kilter when it strikes things like bones. So I look at the other side. The other side was what I considered the exit, and that was behind his right ear on the bone back there. And when the bullet exits, most of the time it splits the skin, so you won't see that abrasion collar that you see on an entrance. It's escaping and splitting the skin. And when I said before that sometimes the bullet starts to tumble when it hits something in a body, like, for example, bone, it won't make a perfectly round circle when it exits. It splits the skin because maybe the bullet's going sideways, or maybe the bullet's going backwards when it exits the body instead of frontwards where the bullet has a point to it. So in this case, the linear, they look like cuts behind his right ear are consistent with an exit wound.
And that would also confirm or be confirmed by the finding that you'd made of the autopsy, that there was a metallic fragment still in his head within that same general path?
Yes.
I'll come back to the laceration on the eyebrow in just a second. Did you discover any other significant injuries externally on Samuel DuBose besides those gunshot wounds and the laceration on the eyebrow?
Just an abrasion to his knee.
Okay. Now, after this external exam, did you open up Samuel DuBose's body and look for internal harm to the body.
Yes,
Were you able to look, in this case, at that entrance wound and the exit wound and follow the path of that bullet as it went through Samuel Dubos's head?
yes.
Can you describe for the jury the path that the bullet took and what, if any, damage it did to him?
The bullet entered, again, the left side of his head above his ear. It went through the skin and the bone of his skull. Now, the brain has two hemispheres, and underneath there's something called the cerebellum, which are two smaller hemispheres, and in between those is the brainstem, which is the start of your spinal cord that goes down your spine. So there's two big hemispheres and two small hemispheres, and then the start of the spinal cord. The bullet, once it went through the bone on the left side, scraped the underside of the two big hemispheres. In doing that, it cut off the brainstem, or the two lower hemispheres of the brain. It cut it off and then exited behind his right ear. In cutting off the brainstem, that's the center that tells your heart to beat. It tells you to take a breath. And so that's a serious injury.
As you trace that path of that bullet through Samuel Dubos's skull, inside the skull, what was the direction or the path that it took?
The bullet started out a little higher on the left, so it went downward. It went from up to down. It went backwards a little bit, and it went left to right.
And when you followed that path, did you recover that metallic fragment inside of Samuel Dubos's skull that you had identified on X-ray?
Yes, I did.
If I can show you what we marked for the purpose of this trial, State's Exhibit number 23. Can you identify that for the jurors?
This is an envelope, and it says fragment, item 1-18, and it has our case number. And it's a sealed envelope.
Can you take a look at what's inside so that you can definitively identify that?
And what's inside is what we call our bullet box. It's a clear plastic container. It has a piece of cellophane, and probably what I removed is wrapped in that cellophane. Should I open that container too?
No, that's fine. Just you identify the container. I take it you've marked it with similar markings so you can identify it as unique to this case?
Yes, it has the case number, it has the location of where we found the bullet fragment, and it has my morgue technician's signature on it.
Very good. After that was recovered and placed in that bullet box, did you put it in the coroner's office property room so that it would be available to Kevin Laddick or any of the other firearms examiners to look at?
Yes.
All right, now you talked about the path that the bullet took as it went through Samuel Dubos's body. You indicated it went through the brainstem, is that correct?
Yes.
Would that have been an immediately incapacitating, immediately fatal injury?
Yes, that was immediate death.
And what would have been the response of any of his arms or legs or appendages?
As soon as that bullet cut off his brainstem, there was no more thought, there was no more purposeful movement of his arms and his legs. He essentially collapses based on the weight of his body, and he just comes to a rest wherever his body falls. So there's no more purposeful movement.
All volitional action would have ceased at that point for Samuel Dubos?
That's correct.
Assuming that Samuel Dubos is a person sitting in a vehicle with his foot either lightly on or hovering over the accelerator of a vehicle, what would you expect his right foot to do as his bullet went through his body?
To which I agree.
Very good basis.
There's absolutely no evidence of what Samuel Dubos's foot was doing at the time that bullet entered his head.
Judge, this is an expert witness that they stipulated to her expertise. If she can answer the question of the effect that this would have had, I think she's entitled to it.
You can answer the question to the effect of what you would have and the answer.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Assuming that he was a person sitting in a vehicle and then his right foot was over lightly touching the accelerator, what would you expect to have happened when that bullet went through his brain, as you indicated it did?
He would no longer have control of his foot, and so, just like everything else, it would collapse down based on the weight of his leg and his foot.
Now, let me ask you this. You talked about another external injury that he had. It was a laceration in either his right or his left, I don't recall which, eyebrow.
Yes.
Okay. And what is a laceration?
A laceration is a split of the skin, usually happens with blunt trauma. So, for example, you hit your head on the wall, or you fall down and hit your knee on the street, and your skin splits. And it's usually something that would need a couple stitches to close up.
So either something hit his eye in the eyebrow, or his eyebrow hit some object or something.
Yes.
Assuming again that Samuel DuBose is seated in a car and that car crashed afterwards and his head might have struck the steering wheel, the dashboard, would you expect that to be consistent with how this injury could have been suffered?
Yes.
Was that laceration something that occurred at or about the time of Samuel DuBose's death?
It occurred about the time he died.
Now, you did not stop your examination when you found these particular injuries, did you?
That's correct.
You did a complete examination of the body, including all organs, to see if there was any other illness or injury that would have contributed to his death on July the 19th, 2015?
That's correct.
Did you find any other illness or injury to Samuel DuBose in your examination that would have caused or contributed to his death that day?
No.
But for the gunshot wound to the head that you've testified about in front of this grand jury, do you find any other reason that he would have died that day?
No.
Now, you indicated that you made a diagram and you took some photos, is that correct?
That's correct.
Let me show you what we've marked for the purpose of this trial.
Judge, we're about to get into the coroner's diagram and photographs that I have previously argued objections to. I would like to review those objections, especially now that you've heard Dr. Luman's testimony. No indication from her that she had any difficulty describing what injuries Samuel DuBose suffered, and no indication from her that she had any need to use those photographs to describe those injuries.
Very good. No other defense objection, the photographs would be permitted.
Let me start, Dr. Loma, State's Exhibit number 24A. Can you identify that for the jurors?
This is the cartoon of Mr. DuBose's head that I drew my findings on.
And those are your notations of the injuries that you saw in the laceration, the entry gunshot wound, and the exit gunshot wound?
Yes.
And then my next set of exhibits are States 24B through 24J. Don't identify them individually, but just go through them from front to back and take a look at those. Can you identify for the jury what that series of photos is?
Those are photographs taken during the autopsy.
They were either taken by you or at your direction, is that correct?
Yes.
Do those photographs fairly and accurately depict the injuries that you saw during the Samuel DuBose autopsy?
Yes.
And would they be of assistance to you if you could display those to the jury to explain to the members of the jury how and why he died that day?
Yes.
Judge, at this time I would move States 24B through, I believe it's J, into evidence and ask that Dr. Loman be allowed to display those to the jury.
Any further objections?
Judge, I object twice and move.
Understood.
Dr. Loman, if you could, you want to step over to the side here and bring those photos here again? Go ahead. Start with, your diagram first. And if you just lay it there, you won't need to step over to the TV. You can just point right there and it'll show up. Yes, to see your fingers on the screen there. Go ahead.
This is the cartoon diagram. As you can see, I've got a arrow pointing to his eyebrow
And those are markings you made to document the injuries you saw, is that correct?
Yes.
All right, go through with, start with 24B and work your way through.
This is the face of Samuel. And you can see a little bit of laceration on his eyebrow. This is the left side of his head. This is the entrance defect.
And have you shaved away the hair there so the wound is more observable and you can see, get a better look at how the wound appears?
Yes.
Does that confirm what you said before about it being an entrance wound?
Yes, I have another picture to show us.
Okay, go ahead. Just use the exhibit number so the record shows what you're talking
This
about.
is E. So this is the entrance defect. And remember before I was talking about how the bullet, as it's pushing its way through the skin, it scrapes and pulls the skin away. So this is the abrasion color I was talking about. This is what makes it an entrance wound. It scrapes its way through the skin. So this is what's on the left side of his head and on his knee. So this is on the right side of his head behind his ear. This is the exit defect. It's a linear tear, very similar to the laceration I was talking about on this board. This is a smaller, no laceration on this side. This is a closer picture of the same. The bullet came out that hole right there, split the skin. There's a little split in your arm. This is a picture of, this is G. This is a picture of the laceration in his eyebrow. Probably need a couple stitches. This is a little copper fragment from a bullet that I recovered from inside his head.
What's that exhibit number? Dr.
This
Long?
is H.
Okay.
This is looking inside the skull, top of the skull here, the forehead. In this area right here, these are where his eyeballs are, underneath this bone right here. So this is his forehead. You see there's a line here. This is a fracture line. He's got a fracture line all along here. These are the injuries that the bullet caused to the skull. Down here, not high enough. There's fracture down along this line here and here. The bullet was forceful enough that it split the skull and it's coming through. And this is eye. This is eye. This is a little lower, part of the same thing. Here's the bullet got inside the fracture of the skull here. There's fractures here. This is, these are where his eyes are. These are the cheeks, if you're looking from the front. This is where the spinal cord goes down the spine. So these are all fractures associated with the bullet.
That's caused by the pressure or the force of the bullet as it passes through.
Yes.
Thank you. I see that. Dr. Luman, I believe you indicate that the purpose of the autopsy is to determine cause and manner of death, how and why a person died, is that correct?
Yes,
And based upon the autopsy you performed on Samuel Dubose, were you able to form an opinion in this case as to how and why he died, that is the cause and manner of death?
yes.
What opinion did you reach in this case?
The cause of death is a single gunshot wound to the head, and the manner of death is homicide.
That's just a second, Judge.
Take your time.
Thanks, Doctor. I don't have any further questions.
Russ?
Your Honor. Dr. Loman, as part of your autopsy procedure, when the body first comes into the coroner's office, I believe you indicated that you start with examining the clothing. Is that correct?
Yes,
And did you conduct an examination of Samuel DuBose's clothing?
yes,
Did you inventory the items that were contained within that clothing?
yes.
Did you find, what did you find?
Are you talking clothing articles or other things?
Other things that were contained in the clothing?
Yes, he had some plastic baggies containing leafy matter. He had a stack of credit cards. He had, in the front pockets, he had 6 individual dollar bills. And in the back pocket, he had a large quantity of money, $2,620.
And did you later learn, Dr. Luman, that the plastic bags with the green leafy material was marijuana?
Yes,
And you indicated he had credit cards?
he had a stack of various cards, some of them business cards. I believe there was one card, I don't know if it was a debit card or a credit card.
Was there a state identification card?
Yes,
And do you know where that is today?
it was destroyed.
By who?
At the time, our office takes those cards so that they're not used fraudulently elsewhere, and we destroy them for the
This is an
state.
identification card issued by the state of Ohio?
Yes,
Do you have any information about that card, such as when it was issued?
there's probably a photograph somewhere that has that information presented on the card.
Do you have such a photograph?
Not that I know of at the moment.
You indicated that you next observed the exterior of the body, correct?
Yes,
And I note from your report that you noticed some striae. Is that a correct pronunciation?
yes.
What is that?
Stretch marks.
What's the cause of stretch marks?
Many times it's if someone weighed a whole lot more and then lost the weight, you end up getting stretch marks. Anybody who's had a child knows about stretch marks.
Okay. You indicated, I believe, that Mr. DeBose weighed 180 pounds at the time you examined his body, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And you also indicated that as part of your examination, you asked for a toxicology report. Is that a correct terminology on my part?
Yes,
And you did that in this case?
yes.
Does that assist you in your determination of manner and cause of death at times?
At times,
Would that have assisted you in this case?
no.
Okay. But you did do that as part of your examination of Sam DeBose's body, correct?
Yes,
You asked or answered in response to one of Mr. Gibson's questions that once the brain stem is severed, that the body is there's no longer any control in the body, correct?
yes.
Does the body just cease all movement at that point?
The body collapses. So there's a little bit of movement as you're collapsing and shifting as the weight shifts. But there's no more wiggling of your finger, no more waving, no more sniffing, or there's none of that, no purposeful movement.
You don't know when that brain stem was severed with relation to what Sam DeBose was doing prior to the bullet entering his head, do you? Maybe I don't know how I said it. Let me repeat that. You don't know what Sam DeBose was doing prior to his brain stem being severed, correct?
I know he was sitting in the driver's side of a car.
You don't know where his feet were positioned?
I do not know.
You don't know whether he was turning the wheel of that car or stomping on the accelerator of that car?
I do not know that, no.
You indicated that you checked the body or checked the internal organs and determined whether or not there was anything else going on within an individual's body, correct?
That's correct.
And you indicated that there was nothing going on in Sam DeBose's body that would have caused his death on that date, correct?
That's correct.
Were there any other issues with his health, or was he a completely healthy individual?
Judge, objection when approached.
In chambers.